The words appeared on the screen of my phone, stark and unforgiving, a digital epitaph for a relationship I had spent a lifetime building, the family that really matters. Those 5 words were nestled beneath a photograph, a portrait of manufactured joy. My daughter-in-law, Diana, was at the center, her smile a brilliant, predatory slash of red lipstick. She was flanked by my son, Michael, his own smile looking hollow and distant, and her mother, Susan, whose expression was one of smug triumph. I was not in the picture. I, Lillian Voss, the woman who had brought Michael into this world, the woman who had worked her fingers to the bone to give him a life she never had been surgically excised from the family narrative. It was an act of casual cruelty, as effortless and final as wiping a stray mark from a pristine whiteboard. My own hands, the ones that bore the scars of decades of sacrifice, trembled as they hovered over the keyboard. A storm of furious, heartbroken words gathered in my mind, a tempest of accusations and grief, but I deleted them all. I typed out 2 words, simple, clean, and devastatingly final. Good luck. I pressed send, and in that silent digital moment, I had no idea that I had just armed a warhead. I had no idea that those 2 small words would detonate with the force of 1,000 suns, unleashing a firestorm that would incinerate the carefully constructed lies of their lives and change our family forever. Less than an hour later, the sound of Michael's frantic shouting tore through the quiet sanctity of my home. The front door slammed open with a crack that echoed the shattering of my own heart. "Mom, what did you do? What in God's name did you do?" He stood in the entryway, his face the color of bleached bone, a ghost haunting the house he grew up in. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his phone, its screen a chaotic mess of missed calls and urgent notifications from his bank, from lawyers, from entities I knew he never dealt with. "The lawyer just called me," he stammered, his voice cracking. "He was talking about the house, Mom, the rental properties. He said everything is being reversed. He mentioned fraud. He mentioned a court order." His words tumbled out, a frantic, incoherent cascade of fear and confusion. At that moment, as I looked at the panic in the eyes of the son I no longer recognized, a cold, serene calm settled over me. The tremor in my hands ceased. The storm inside my heart grew still. I knew with absolute certainty that my retribution had begun. But to understand the chilling satisfaction of that moment, to comprehend the depths of the betrayal that led a 63-year-old woman to dismantle her own son's life, you must understand the story from its very beginning. My name is Lillian Voss, and for my entire life, I have been a builder. I built a life from the ashes of abandonment. It started when I was just 16 years old, pregnant and alone on a street corner in Portland, Oregon. The father of my child had vanished like a whisper on the wind, leaving me with nothing but a growing belly and a will of iron, so I started baking. I sold homemade apple pies, their scent a beacon of hope in the gray drizzle of the city. Each dollar earned was a brick, each pie sold was a foundation stone. With those first few dollars, I bought more flour, more apples, more hope. Year after year, dollar by dollar, sale by sale, I built a small empire. It wasn't glamorous. It was built with 16-hour days, with flour in my hair and calluses on my hands. It grew into 3 rental properties, a portfolio of wise investments, and a bank account that could provide a security I had never known. Everything I built, every single brick in my financial fortress, was for Michael, my son, my world. Everything changed on a Sunday in March, the day Michael brought Diana home. The rich, comforting aroma of my slow-cooked beef stew, a recipe passed down through generations, filled the air. It was a scent of home, of love, of stability. Then I heard it, a sound that cut through the warmth like a shard of ice. The sharp, arrogant clack of high heels on my polished hardwood floors. That sound was a premonition, a warning bell tolling for the peace I had so carefully cultivated. She appeared in the doorway of my kitchen, not as a guest, but as a conqueror. She wore a tight red dress that seemed poured onto her body, a second skin of crimson aggression. Her smile was a masterpiece of insincerity, as bright and as hollow as a cheap piece of plastic. "So, you're the mother-in-law," she said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, but her words were not a greeting. They were a label, a categorization. She extended a hand, and as I took it, I was struck by its coldness, a startling lack of warmth that seemed to emanate from her very core. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over me, a rapid, dismissive appraisal from my sensible shoes to my graying hair. There was no "nice to meet you," no "pleased to make your acquaintance." I was simply the mother-in-law, an object, a piece of furniture in the landscape of her new life with my son. Her fingernails, long, perfect, and painted a shade of blood red, were a stark contrast to my own hands, hands that told the story of my life in their scars, their calluses, their unwavering strength. These were the hands that had changed his diapers, baked his birthday cakes, and signed the checks for his college education. Michael, my sweet, naive Michael, was utterly blinded by the dazzling performance of this woman. He saw only her beauty, her manufactured charm. He did not see the subtle venom that dripped from her perfectly articulated words. My son, the boy I had raised alone after his father proved to be a coward, was mesmerized. I watched him watch her, and I saw a stranger looking at a viper, mistaking it for a hummingbird. But I held my tongue. I smiled. I welcomed her, and I chose to believe that love could smooth even the sharpest of edges. I never imagined that in my own home I was nurturing the very serpent that would, in time, attempt to strike a mortal blow. That first dinner was not a meal. It was a silent, undeclared war. My dining table became a battlefield, and Diana was its commanding general. "What an interesting decorating style," she remarked, her gaze flicking dismissively over the family photos that adorned my walls. These were my treasures, frozen moments of a life lived with love. Her eyes lingered for a moment too long on a picture of me at my graduation. I had earned a degree as an accounting technician at night school while raising Michael, the only formal education I could afford, a testament to my perseverance. Her gaze made it feel small, insignificant. "This stew has such a bold flavor," she added later, pushing her plate away after only a few bites, as if the hearty, home-cooked meal was an assault on her refined palate. Every comment was a carefully wrapped insult, a paper cut to the soul delivered with the guise of politeness. I swallowed my pride along with my stew and kept a smile plastered on my face. I told myself I was being sensitive, that this was just the awkwardness of a first meeting. As I cleared the table to serve dessert, a pie made from the same recipe that had launched my empire, I overheard her whisper to Michael. Her voice was a conspiratorial hiss. "Honey, does she always cook so homespun? Back at my mother's, we have a chef who prepares more refined dishes." The word homespun was meant to wound, and it found its mark. Her words were not just about my cooking. They were a judgment on my life, my values, my very being. She was drawing a line in the sand, separating her world of inherited wealth and refined chefs from my world of hard work and homemade pies. Her mother, Susan, was the owner of a chain of upscale salons, a woman who lived in a sprawling mansion in the most affluent part of town. After they left, I sat alone at the table, the plates Diana had barely touched mocking me. The silence in my house, usually a comforting embrace, felt heavy, pregnant with a sense of foreboding. Michael, so enraptured by his new love, had noticed nothing. He saw only a successful dinner, a meeting of the two most important women in his life. He didn't see the silent daggers she had thrown, or the way I had bled internally with each one. I sat in my favorite armchair, the very chair where I had sat night after night, mending his school uniforms to save money, and for the first time in many, many years, I cried. But I was a survivor. I had survived poverty, abandonment, and loneliness. I would not let a spoiled, arrogant young woman make me feel like a stranger in my own home. I resolved to be patient, to give her time. Little did I know that first, stinging humiliation was merely the opening salvo in a 5-year campaign of psychological warfare, a slow, methodical siege that would ultimately lead me to the most radical and liberating decision of my life. The months that followed were a masterclass in slow, insidious torture, all disguised as dutiful family visits. Diana had perfected the art of humiliating me with a smile, a skill she wielded with the precision of a surgeon. Every Sunday lunch, an event Michael insisted upon, became my personal trial. I was the target of her veiled insults, her condescending remarks, all delivered with a sweet, saccharine tone that made my teeth ache. In front of Michael, she was the perfect doting daughter-in-law, all charm and affection. The moment he would leave the room to take a call or use the restroom, the mask would drop and the viper would emerge. "Oh dear, mother-in-law, still using that drugstore face cream? You know, at your age, you really should invest in something with better anti-aging properties. Look at those wrinkles." She would say this while standing in my bathroom, applying some fragrant, impossibly expensive serum from a tiny imported bottle, her reflection in the mirror looking down on mine. Her words were daggers wrapped in velvet, each one designed to chip away at my self-worth. I would grit my teeth, force a smile, and continue preparing the meal, swallowing my pride like a bitter pill. I told myself I was doing it for Michael, for his happiness. The situation deteriorated exponentially when they announced their engagement. Michael arrived one afternoon, his eyes shining with a joy I hadn't seen since he was a boy on Christmas morning. He held a bottle of champagne, the good kind, and his words were a torrent of excitement about wedding plans and their future together. "Mom, I want you to be the first to know. Diana and I are getting married in December," he said, pulling me into a hug so tight it squeezed the air from my lungs. My heart, which should have soared with joy, instead fractured into 1,000 pieces. But I smiled. I hugged him back. I congratulated him with a warmth I did not feel. Because that is what mothers do. We swallow our own pain to witness our children's joy. Diana, naturally, had a very specific role for me in her wedding plans, that of a silent, invisible, and preferably absent spectator. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, she began visiting me alone, under the pretext of bonding and planning the event together. The reality was far more sinister. She would sit in my living room, in my favorite armchair, as if she owned the place, her legs crossed, that same plastic smile fixed on her face. She was not there to plan. She was there to lay down the new laws of the family. "Look, dear mother-in-law, I know you have been the only woman in Michael's life for all these years, but things are going to change now." She said this one Tuesday afternoon, sipping tea from my best china, her long nails tapping a restless, threatening rhythm on the tabletop. "A married man needs his own space, his privacy with his wife. There simply cannot be a third wheel interfering in the marriage." The way she uttered the phrase "third wheel" made my blood run cold. It was a brand, a label she was searing onto my identity. I tried to explain, my voice calm and measured, that I had never once meddled in Michael's relationships, that I had always respected his choices and his privacy, but Diana was not interested in the truth. "Oh, don't misunderstand me," she cooed, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "I am not suggesting you do anything wrong on purpose. It's just that, well, men can be so attached to their mothers, can't they? And that sort of attachment can cause significant issues in a healthy marriage." Her words were acid, dissolving the very foundation of my relationship with my son, painting my love as a toxic, controlling force. The wedding planning itself was a series of calculated humiliations. When the day came to shop for her wedding dress, an occasion I had dreamed of sharing with my future daughter-in-law, I was relegated to a corner chair like a piece of unwanted luggage. Diana and her mother, Susan, made all the decisions, their laughter and excited chatter forming a wall that excluded me completely. "This is really a mother-daughter tradition," Susan said, flashing me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "I'm sure you understand." I sat there, a silent ghost at the feast, watching another woman take the place that should have been mine. The ultimate insult came when they were to tour the wedding venue. Michael had explicitly invited me, excited for me to see the beautiful estate, but when we arrived, Diana feigned a look of surprise. "Oh, honey, I didn't realize you had invited your mom. We had agreed it would just be the three of us," she said, gesturing between herself, Michael, and Susan. "But she can come along, of course. Though she won't have much of a say, since we have already decided on everything." I became a shadow, trailing behind them as they discussed flower arrangements and seating charts. My own son, too, caught up in the whirlwind to notice that I had been rendered mute and invisible. On the wedding day itself, Diana orchestrated events with the skill of a military strategist to ensure I appeared in as few photographs as possible. Every time the photographer would try to assemble a family portrait, she would find a task for me. "Dear mother-in-law, could you possibly go and check if the guests at the back have enough water? These little details are so important, you know." I would obey, walking away like a member of the catering staff, while Susan would seamlessly slide into my place beside my son, her smile beaming for the camera, cementing her position as the new matriarch. After the honeymoon, the newlyweds moved into a beautiful apartment, a home whose down payment I had largely financed. Michael had come to me months before, his face etched with worry, explaining that his salary from his tech job was not quite enough to secure the loan for the place they had their hearts set on. "Mom, you know I'll pay back every single cent," he had promised, his eyes filled with a desperate hope. "I just need a loan of $50,000. How could I say no? How could a mother refuse to help her only child build his future? So I gave him the money, a significant portion of my life savings, without a second thought. But my visits to their new home, the home I had helped buy, became weekly sessions of psychological torment. Diana had decorated the apartment in a cold, minimalist style that was the antithesis of my warm, traditional taste. Everything was white, or gray, or chrome. It felt less like a home and more like a high-end showroom. "Be careful sitting on that couch, dear mother-in-law. It's imported from Italy and the fabric is quite delicate. We wouldn't want it to get stained," she would say every single time I visited, treating me like a clumsy, destructive intruder. During their dinner parties, Diana perfected the art of social exclusion. She would guide the conversation exclusively to topics she knew I had no knowledge of, trendy new restaurants I had never heard of, obscure art films I had never seen, exotic trips they were planning to places I would never go. If I dared to try and join the conversation, she would look at me with an expression of pitying condescension. "Oh yes, dear mother-in-law, but you wouldn't know that place, it is rather exclusive." Her words were subtle, 1,000 tiny cuts that Michael, in his blissful ignorance, never seemed to notice. The final, catastrophic straw came when Diana began to meddle in my finances, using Michael as her mouthpiece. He appeared at my door one evening, his expression uncharacteristically serious. He carried a leather-bound folder. "Mom, Diana and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future. You are getting older, and we want to ensure you are taken care of, and that our own financial future is secure. What if you were to put the properties in my name? That way, if anything should ever happen to you, we can avoid any messy legal issues, probate court, things like that. It would just be simpler for everyone." It was Michael's voice, but the words, the cold, calculating logic, were pure Diana. I could hear her influence in every carefully chosen syllable. That night, sitting alone in the quiet of my house, the house I had bought and paid for with my own sweat and tears, a horrifying realization dawned on me. I had raised a stranger. The little boy who once cried inconsolably when I got a paper cut was now asking me to sign away my entire life's work, the legacy I had built from nothing. He was asking me to hand over the keys to my kingdom, not out of concern for my well-being, but as a matter of convenience for him and his manipulative wife. But a mother's love is a powerful, irrational force. It is a form of blindness, a deafness to the blaring warning signs. Against every instinct screaming within me, against all logic and reason, I did it. I signed the papers he placed in front of me, the legal documents that transferred ownership of my 3 properties to him. I signed them because I loved him, and because a part of me, a foolish, desperate part, still believed that my son would never, ever hurt me. On that day, with the stroke of a pen, I dug my own grave. It would take me many more months of pain and humiliation to finally realize the terrifying depth of my mistake, and to understand that the only way out was to claw my way back to the surface. Diana's words, overheard through the thin veil of a closed door, were not just insults. They were the chillingly precise blueprints of my destruction. My daughter-in-law was not just cruel, she was a methodical architect of ruin, and she was planning to use the sacred idea of a future grandchild as a weapon to evict me from my own life. Her calculated callousness sent a shiver of pure terror down my spine, but in that terror, something else was forged, a core of unyielding, steely determination. If she could plot my downfall with such ruthless efficiency, then I could orchestrate my defense with equal, if not greater, resolve. The game had changed. I was no longer a passive victim. I was a silent combatant. That very night, huddled in the cold confines of my own bathroom, the one place I felt I could not be overheard, I made a call that would alter the course of my future. I dialed the number of Elias Vance, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer I had consulted years ago for my estate planning. "Elias, we need to move, and we need to move fast. This situation has become untenable," I whispered into the phone, my voice tight with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. My lawyer, a man who dealt in facts and evidence, had been quietly reviewing copies of the transfer documents I had sent him weeks prior, searching for any legal crevice, any flaw in the paperwork that could serve as a foothold. "Lillian, I have good news," Elias replied, and his voice, usually so measured, was tinged with a hopeful energy. "We have found several significant irregularities in the contracts. First, there was no proper cooling-off period stipulated, which is legally required for transfers of this magnitude between family members to prevent undue influence. Second, the restrictive clauses and future implications were not clearly and explicitly explained to you, as they should have been. And third, and this is our strongest angle, we have a compelling case that you signed these documents under extreme emotional duress and familial pressure." My heart, which had been a leaden weight in my chest for months, began to beat with a frantic, hopeful rhythm. For the first time, I saw a flicker of light in the suffocating darkness of the tunnel I was in. "What do I need to do?" I asked, my mind already racing. "Keep documenting everything," Elias instructed, his tone shifting into that of a field commander. "Every insult, every act of humiliation. Every single instance that shows they are creating a hostile and degrading living environment for you on what is, for now, legally your own property. And Lillian, if you can, record conversations, legally of course. Check the state laws on one-party consent." From that day forward, I transformed. I became a detective in my own home, a spy in the enemy camp. I purchased a tiny digital recorder, no bigger than my thumb, which I kept concealed in the pocket of my apron. I began to document Diana's tyranny, capturing her venomous words, which she so freely dispensed when she believed I was out of earshot. The first recording I captured was a gut-wrenching confirmation of my worst fears. Diana was on the phone with her mother, Susan, their conversation a gleeful, collaborative plotting of my final expulsion. "Mom, I have it all figured out," Diana's voice chirped, cold and clear on the recording. "Once I get pregnant, we will tell the old lady that the stress of her presence is bad for the baby. We'll say the doctor recommends a quiet, peaceful environment. If she refuses to leave, we will gently remind her that she has no legal rights to the house anymore. And if she still puts up a fight, we will threaten her with a restraining order for family harassment. It's foolproof." Susan's response was even more chilling, a casual discussion of dismantling my life. "Perfect, sweetheart. I have already spoken to our architect. We can knock down the wall of her bedroom to create that magnificent walk-in closet you have always wanted. And her little bathroom can be converted into a home office for Michael. This house has such good bones. It will be absolutely stunning once we get rid of all her drab, outdated furniture." That single recording was my crown jewel, the undeniable, irrefutable proof that this was not a simple case of a strained relationship, but a premeditated conspiracy to defraud and dispossess me. But I knew I needed more. I needed to build a fortress of evidence, so high and so impregnable that no lawyer, no matter how expensive, could ever breach its walls. For weeks, I gathered material with the focus of an investigative journalist on the story of a lifetime. One afternoon, while Diana was taking one of her long, luxurious showers, she carelessly left her phone on the kitchen counter. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of risk and opportunity. With trembling fingers, I picked it up. What I found scrolling through her messages took my breath away. There was a long text thread with a friend, a detailed, step-by-step account of her strategy to deal with what she called the clingy mother-in-law problem. The messages were a portrait of calculated cruelty. "Girl, I swear this old woman is going to drive me insane, but the mission is almost complete," Diana had written. "Michael is completely on my side now. I have successfully convinced him that his mother's love is actually a form of toxic control. The next step is the pregnancy announcement. Once I have a baby on the way, I will play the fragile, expectant mother card. I will say I need peace and quiet, and for the sake of the baby's health, she has got to go. It is the perfect, unassailable plan." My hands shook with a potent cocktail of rage and adrenaline as I used my own phone to take pictures of the screen, capturing every single damning word. Each text message was a confession, each emoji a punctuation mark on her guilt. Diana was not just selfish or entitled. She was a master manipulator, a sociopath who had studied my son and me like a scientist. identifying our weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision to steal my legacy and destroy my relationship with my only child. The most devastating piece of evidence, the one that would become the cornerstone of my legal case, came entirely by chance. It was a Sunday afternoon. Michael had run out to the store to pick up some wine for dinner. Diana, believing I was taking a nap in my room, took a phone call in the living room. I was in the kitchen, pretending to wash vegetables, with my little recorder silently running in my apron pocket. "Yeah, Grandma, it is almost all sorted out." Diana's sugary voice drifted into the kitchen. "Michael is like putty in my hands. He does whatever I say. I managed to get him to have her sign the house over into his name. The fool doesn't realize that under marital property laws, when we eventually divorce, I automatically get half of everything. Old lady Lillian worked her entire life to build this little fortune, and now it is all going to be mine." Her next words were the ones that froze the very blood in my veins. "No, Grandma. I never planned on staying with Michael forever. Please." The man is spineless, utterly devoid of any real ambition. But he was the perfect, gullible stepping stone to get what I wanted. Once all the assets are legally locked in and I have secured my half, I will divorce him and finally marry someone on my own level. That confession was the moment my mission transformed. This was no longer about saving my home. This was about saving my son. Diana hadn't just humiliated me and stolen my property. She was planning to financially and emotionally obliterate my child after using him as a pawn in her twisted game. The war was no longer just mine. It was now a war for Michael's future. And she had no earthly idea that I had been amassing an arsenal for months, preparing for this very battle. That night, as the house slept, I sat in my armchair, the silent witness to my life's joys and sorrows, and I meticulously planned my counterattack. I laid out my weapons on the coffee table, the recordings, the photographs of the texts, the bank documents Elias had uncovered, a list of witnesses. I had a brilliant lawyer who had found the legal leverage we needed. And most importantly, I had the unshakable will of a woman who had already lost everything and therefore had absolutely nothing left to lose. My revenge would be a 3-act play, perfectly coordinated and ruthlessly executed, and the curtain would rise with a single, arrogant social media post. Through the months of October and November, as the leaves outside turned brittle and fell, Diana's psychological assaults intensified. With the properties now legally in Michael's name, she no longer felt the need to maintain even the thinnest veneer of civility, especially when my son wasn't present. Her contempt for me was a palpable thing, a toxic fog that filled every room she entered. One Tuesday morning, as I stood at the sink washing the breakfast dishes she had deliberately left for me, she sauntered into the kitchen, leaning against the counter with an air of proprietary ownership that made my skin crawl. "Dear mother-in-law, I have a proposal that I think you are going to love," she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "My mother knows of this gorgeous retirement community. It has beautiful gardens, organized activities, social events for people your age. Don't you think you would be so much happier there, surrounded by people who share your interests?" The way she said people your age was like she was describing a different species, a creature to be managed and put away. I turned from the sink, my hands dripping with soap suds, and met her gaze with a calm I had spent months perfecting. "Diana, this is my home. It contains my memories, my history. My entire life is within these walls. I am not going anywhere." She let out a small, pitying laugh. "Oh, you sweet, naive thing. You still do not get it, do you? This isn't your house anymore. Legally, it belongs to Michael. And since Michael is my husband, that makes me the lady of this house." Her words were meant to be a slap, a final assertion of her dominance. But for me, they were fuel, igniting the fires of my resolve and hardening my decision to accelerate my plans. That same afternoon, I met with Elias in his downtown office. The space was organized and professional, a reflection of the man himself. He had been working tirelessly, and the dossier he had compiled was thick and meticulously organized. "Lillian, we have found the definitive evidence," he said, a rare, triumphant smile gracing his features. "The transfer documents you signed contain procedural irregularities so severe that any competent judge would declare them null and void. Furthermore, your recordings provide a clear and undeniable pattern of familial manipulation and psychological abuse. You were not a willing donor. You were a victim of a coordinated campaign of coercion. My heart raced as I flipped through the pages, each one a testament to his diligence, each one a nail in Diana's legal coffin. But that is not all, Elias continued, his expression turning grim. We have also discovered that Diana has been using the properties, which still legally belong to you pending this case, as collateral for a series of personal loans without your knowledge or consent. She has managed to accumulate debts of over $50,000, all tied to your assets. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with a white-hot rage. The sheer audacity of her scheme was breathtaking. The plan Elias laid out was simple, elegant, and devastating. We would file a comprehensive lawsuit for contract nullification, citing breach of trust, psychological manipulation, and fraudulent use of assets. But timing was everything. We need a public trigger, Elias explained, his lawyerly mind seeing the chessboard with perfect clarity. We need an event, an action on her part so undeniably cruel and contemptuous that it serves as the emotional centerpiece of our case. We need a piece of evidence so clear, so public, that no one could possibly defend her behavior. That trigger arrived on Friday, the 13th of December, a date that will forever be etched into the landscape of my memory. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch. The simple, familiar motions of chopping vegetables, usually a source of comfort. From the living room, I heard a peal of delighted laughter. It was Diana, joined by her mother, Susan, and two of their friends. They were huddled over her phone, giggling like schoolgirls. "What a gorgeous photo," one of the friends exclaimed. "You guys look like the absolute perfect family." A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Curiosity, a morbid, self-destructive impulse, drew me closer. I peered around the doorframe, and what I saw shattered the final remnants of my already broken heart. But in that shattering, it also ignited the righteous fury I had been carefully banking for months. Diana had posted a photograph on her social media. It was a picture of herself, Michael, and Susan, all posed in my living room, in front of my fireplace. They were smiling, a tableau of domestic bliss, and beneath the photo, a caption that served as a public declaration of my erasure. The family that really matters. The message was as clear as it was cruel. I, the woman who had raised Michael alone for 25 years, the woman who had sacrificed her youth, her dreams, and her energy to give him a life of opportunity, I had been officially, publicly, and permanently deleted from the only family that mattered to Diana. The composition of the photo was deliberate, a calculated act of exclusion. The caption was a knife, twisted in a wound that had been festering for 5 long years. The phone calls started almost immediately. My friends, my neighbors, the people who had witnessed my life, they saw the post. "Lillian, did you see what your daughter-in-law posted?" asked Nancy, my neighbor of 30 years, her voice trembling with indignation. How could she be so callous, so cruel? Supportive comments began to appear on my own social media page from people who knew the truth. But I knew this was not a moment for grief. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the trigger. With hands that were now steady and sure, I picked up my phone, navigated to her post, and typed my reply. 2 words, 2 simple, loaded, and world-altering words. Good luck. The instant I hit the send button, I felt a profound sense of release. I had not just replied to a social media post. I had pushed the button. I had detonated the nuclear bomb that would shatter the perfect, gilded life Diana thought she had built upon the ruins of my own. My next call was to Elias. "It's time," I said, my voice low and steady. "Execute the plan. It just happened. We have what we needed." My lawyer, who had been on standby for weeks, responded with a single satisfying word. "Perfect. Lillian, within the next hour, all the legal documents will be in motion. The property transfers will be legally challenged and voided pending trial. The associated bank accounts will be frozen by court order, and we will begin the immediate legal process for the full recovery of all your assets." As Elias set the formidable machinery of the law into motion, I took a deep breath and braced myself for the coming storm. I knew that within the hour Michael's phone would begin to ring, and each call would be a wrecking ball, demolishing the foundations of his life. The bank, his own lawyer, the financial authorities, they would all descend upon him simultaneously, informing him that the kingdom he thought he ruled was built on sand, and the tide was now coming in. During that hour of tense anticipation, Diana and her friends continued to laugh in the living room, blissfully unaware of the impending collapse of their world. "Look at how I put all those nosy old biddies in their place," she said, smugly reading the initial sycophantic comments on her post. "It is about time that everyone understood who is in charge of this family now." Her words were daggers, but they no longer hurt me, they only strengthened my resolve. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Michael's phone began to ring. It was the bank. An automated fraud alert followed by a call from a senior manager, informing him that the accounts tied to the properties had been frozen by an immediate court order. 10 minutes later, another call, this one from the lawyer who had handled the original property transfer, his voice frantic as he explained that he had been notified of serious legal irregularities in the documents they had signed. From the kitchen I could hear the rising panic in Michael's voice, each word a step higher on the scale of desperation. "What do you mean the accounts are frozen? What do you mean the contracts are void? What irregularities are you talking about?" Diana's laughter had stopped. I could feel her terror from the other room, a palpable spreading stain of fear. The third call was the kill shot. It was Elias Vance, his voice calm, professional, and utterly implacable, officially notifying Michael that a lawsuit had been filed to nullify the property transfers in their entirety. And until the case was resolved, all assets would automatically and immediately revert to their original and sole owner. "Mr. Michael, your mother has exercised her legal right to immediately reclaim everything that belongs to her," Elias stated with devastating finality. When Michael hung up the phone, his face was a ghostly mask of disbelief. His hands were shaking as he looked at Diana, searching for an answer she could not possibly provide. "What is going on?" He screamed at her, his voice a raw sound of betrayal. "Why is the lawyer saying Mom can take everything back? What did we do wrong?" Diana was paralyzed, a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming legal freight train, unable to process the speed and totality of her plan's collapse. That is when Michael stormed through the house, his eyes wild with desperation, bellowing my name. "Mom, what did you do? The lawyer just called me about the house, the properties, everything." His voice was a maelstrom of panic, confusion, and a dawning, terrible fear. At that moment, as he stood before me, broken and desperate, I knew my revenge had officially begun. And nothing in that house, my house, now mine once again, would ever be the same. "Mom, please, you have to tell me what is happening," Michael pleaded. The anger had evaporated from his voice, replaced by a raw, childlike desperation. He fell to his knees beside my armchair, the same way he used to do when he was a little boy and had broken a favorite vase or a precious plate. But this time, what was broken was not porcelain, it was trust. It was respect. It was the very fabric of the family I had woven with my own 2 hands, a fabric they had systematically shredded. I looked down at him, my expression calm, my heart a steady, rhythmic beat. I felt the tranquility that comes only from years of endured suffering and the absolute certainty of taking the right and necessary action. "Son, sit down. It is time for you to know the entire truth," I said, my voice even and low. I gestured to the couch, the same couch where we had watched countless movies, where we had talked for hours when he was a teenager navigating the complexities of life. Diana started to approach, her face a mask of confusion and defiance, but I stopped her with a single hard look, a gaze that tolerated no argument. "You will sit as well, Diana. This concerns you most of all." From a bag beside my chair, I retrieved a thick manila folder, the dossier of my pain, the chronicle I had been compiling for months. It contained everything: photographs, transcribed recordings, bank documents, and a detailed, dated timeline of every single humiliation I had suffered over the past 2 years. "Michael, I want you to look at this," I said, handing him the first piece of evidence. It was a clear, crisp screenshot of the text message in which Diana had outlined her plan to a friend, the one where she detailed using a future pregnancy as a pretext to have me removed from my own home. Michael's face, already pale, seemed to drain of all remaining color as he read. His eyes darted back and forth across the screen, and with each line, his expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror. "Diana, what is this?" he asked, his voice a trembling whisper. He looked at his wife, but she sat frozen, her face as white as the living room walls. She said nothing. "That is nothing compared to this," I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. I handed him the printed transcript of the audio recording, the one where Diana had confessed her entire scheme to her grandmother, her plan to divorce him as soon as she had secured her half of my life's work. "Read it, Michael. Read it out loud. I want you to hear the words of the woman you claim to love, spoken in your own voice." His hands shook as he took the paper. He began to read, his voice faltering, cracking with each devastating word. "Michael is like putty in my hands. He does whatever I say. I never planned on staying with him forever. Once everything is legally locked in, I will divorce him, take my half, and marry someone on my level." Each word he spoke was a hammer blow, shattering the carefully constructed illusion of his marriage, of his life. Diana finally found her voice, and she fell back on her most trusted weapon: emotional manipulation. "Honey, that's not true. She is making it all up. I never said those things. Your mother is fabricating all of this to tear us apart. Can't you see she has always been jealous of our love?" Her words, once so effective, now sounded hollow, desperate, the last gasps of a cornered animal. I simply reached for my phone, which was already connected to a small Bluetooth speaker on the end table. I pressed play. Diana's crystal-clear, sugary voice filled the room, repeating the monstrous confession word for word. The silence that followed was absolute, a deafening void where a marriage had just died. Michael stared at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time, a complete and terrifying stranger. "There is more," I continued, my voice relentless. I presented him with the bank documents Elias had uncovered, the statements showing the personal loans Diana had taken out using my properties as collateral. "Your wife has been funding her lavish lifestyle by secretly accumulating debt against my assets. She owes over $50,000, a debt she was likely planning to pay off after she sold this very house from under me." The numbers on the page were cold, hard, and undeniable. Michael stood up and walked to the window, turning his back on Diana, on the wreckage of his life. His shoulders shook with silent, racking sobs. "How could I have been so blind?" he murmured, his words fogging the glass. "How could I have let her treat you like this, Mom? How could I have been so stupid?" His pain was palpable, a raw and agonizing thing, but it had come far too late. I was not finished. The final blow, the one I had saved for last, would be the most devastating of all. I pulled out the transcript of the final recording, the one of Diana and her mother Susan, gleefully planning to demolish my bedroom to build a walk-in closet. "Listen to this, son. Listen to how they plan to erase every last trace of you from this house." As the recording played, detailing their callous plans for my personal sanctuary, Diana finally broke. Her composure shattered, and the manipulative mask fell away completely, revealing the venomous creature beneath. "Fine. Yes. It is all true," she screamed, her voice a raw, ugly sound. "But you brought this on yourself, you meddling old woman, always in the way, always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Michael needed a wife, not a second, controlling mother. Her outburst was a full confession, a confirmation of everything I already knew, but hearing it spoken aloud, without the pretense and the fake smiles, was a moment of profound, liberating validation. "Thank you for your honesty, Diana," I replied, my calm infuriating her even more. "Now Michael can finally see exactly who you are." She turned her rage on him. "I do not care what you think anymore. I deserve better than this outdated house and this mediocre family. Michael is a spineless loser, and you," she said, pointing a trembling red-nailed finger at me, "are a bitter old hag who does not know when to quit." Michael turned slowly from the window, and for the first time in 5 long years, I saw a flicker of my own iron will in his eyes, a determination I thought had been extinguished forever. "Diana, I want you out of this house. Right now," he said, his voice quiet but firm, devoid of the weakness that had defined him for so long. "I never want to see you again. You are kicking me out?" She shrieked, her voice filled with disbelief. "This is my house. I am your wife. You cannot do this to me." But Michael's decision was final. "This was never your house," he said, his voice growing stronger with every word. "This is my mother's house. The house of the woman who sacrificed everything for me, while you did nothing but plot my destruction. Get out. Get out now before I call the police." She made one last desperate attempt. Approaching him with tears welling in her eyes, the crocodile tears she had used to manipulate him for years. "Honey, please, we can fix this. I do love you, I really do. Everything I said was just out of anger. We can start over, just the two of us, without your mother in the way." But the spell was broken. My son was no longer the puppet, and she was no longer the master. "No, Diana, it is over. You lied to me. You stole from my mother. You humiliated her, and you planned to betray me from the very beginning. There is nothing left to fix." His voice echoed with a resolve that sounded so much like my own. Just then the doorbell rang, a sharp, clear chime that signaled the beginning of the end. It was Elias, my lawyer, and with him stood a uniformed police officer. "Miss Voss, we are here to formalize the recovery of your properties and to officially serve notice of the nullification of the contracts," Elias announced, his voice the epitome of professional decorum. The officer held a stack of legal documents that represented the final nail in the coffin of Diana's world. "Miss Caldwell," the officer said, addressing Diana directly, "you have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises. Any attempt to remain on the property beyond that time will be considered trespassing." The words struck Diana with the force of a physical blow. She glared at all of us, her eyes burning with a pure, undiluted hatred. "This is not over," she hissed as she stormed up the stairs to pack her things. "You have no idea who you are messing with. My family has connections. We have lawyers. I will take back everything that is mine." Her words were the desperate roars of a defeated beast. From upstairs we heard the sounds of her rage, drawers being yanked open, clothes being thrown, objects crashing against the walls. A final, childish tantrum. But I did not care. Possessions could be replaced. Dignity, once reclaimed, was priceless. When Diana came back downstairs, dragging 2 large, expensive suitcases behind her, she was transformed. The elegant, composed woman who had entered my home 5 years ago was gone. Her hair was a mess, her expensive makeup was smeared from her angry tears, and her emerald green dress was wrinkled. "Michael, please, think this through," she tried one last time, her voice returning to that syrupy, manipulative tone. "This is all your mother's fault. She is tearing us apart because she cannot stand to see you happy with another woman. Don't you see she is playing with your mind?" Her desperate words bounced off Michael's newfound resolve like pebbles off a stone wall. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of fear went through me, the fear that his old weakness might resurface. But the man standing before me was not the same man from an hour ago. "Diana, it does not work anymore. You cannot brainwash me with your lies. I have seen the proof. I have heard the recordings. I know exactly who you are, and I know what you plan to do to me." The police officer checked his watch with an air of professional impatience. "Ma'am, you have 15 minutes left to leave the property." His words were a brutal, final countdown. She looked around the living room, the room she had redecorated to her own cold tastes, as if trying to memorize the spoils of a war she had so spectacularly lost. "Fine," she finally said, her voice cracking but still laced with venom. "I am leaving. But know this. This is not over. I will sue you for defamation, for psychological abuse, for conspiracy." She pointed a scornful finger at Elias, who merely smiled, the calm, confident smile of a man holding all the winning cards. "Miss Caldwell," Elias replied calmly, "I would strongly suggest you consult with your own legal counsel before making such threats. We have more than enough evidence to pursue criminal charges against you for fraud, financial manipulation, and elder abuse. Any attempt at legal retaliation on your part will only worsen your own situation." The smirk vanished from Diana's face, replaced by a dawning realization of her complete and utter defeat. She dragged her suitcases to the front door, pausing at the threshold for one last pathetic volley of insults. "Lillian, you are a bitter, manipulative old woman. You have successfully torn us apart." But Michael will realize his mistake. When he is all alone and depressed, he will remember how happy he was with me, and it will be too late. Her words were meant to be poison darts, but they fell harmlessly to the floor. "Diana," I replied, rising from my armchair, feeling the full weight of my reclaimed dignity. "I did not tear anyone apart. You unmasked yourself with your own words and your own actions. Michael is not losing a wife today. He is freeing himself from a con artist who only ever saw him as a means to an end. My voice was steady, bearing no trace of the humiliated woman I had been for so long. "You know nothing about real love," she spat. "You are just a lonely, bitter woman who never got over your husband abandoning you. That is why you cannot stand to see your son find happiness with someone else." Her jab about my husband was the lowest blow she could possibly land, but it no longer had the power to wound me. "My husband did not abandon me, Diana. He was killed in a car accident when Michael was 8 years old. But even if he had, I would rather be a lone, dignified woman than a married con artist who was actively planning to betray her own husband," I said calmly. The look of shock on her face was my final small victory. She had never even bothered to learn the true story of our family. Just then, a luxury SUV pulled up to the curb, its horn honking with impatience. Susan had arrived to rescue her daughter from the mess they had co-created. She stormed into the house, her face a thundercloud of arrogance, and stopped short at the scene before her. "What is going on here? Why does Diana have suitcases? Who are all these people?" Her questions tumbled out, a rapid-fire assault of confusion. "Mom, the old lady set a legal trap for us," Diana explained, her voice thick with theatrical sobs that fooled no one. "She has taken back all the properties and they are kicking me out." Susan turned her glare on me. "Miss Voss, this is outrageous. My daughter is a married woman. She has legal rights to this property. You cannot simply throw her out on the street." Elias stepped forward, a calm and immovable force of legal authority. "Mrs. Hensley, your daughter never had any legal rights to these properties. The transfer contracts have been declared void due to serious procedural irregularities and evidence of coercion. Furthermore, we have uncovered evidence that your daughter used these properties as collateral for unauthorized personal loans, which, I should remind you, is a federal crime." The words "federal crime" hung in the air, sucking the oxygen from the room. Susan's arrogance melted away, replaced by a stark, naked terror. "Federal crime? What are you talking about? My daughter would never do anything illegal." But her voice lacked conviction. It was clear she knew far more about Diana's financial schemes than she was letting on. "Mrs. Hensley," Elias continued relentlessly, "we also have evidence in the form of recorded conversations that you actively participated in the psychological manipulation of my client, including suggesting specific tactics to pressure Miss Voss into leaving her own home." Susan's face turned as white as a sheet. The officer checked his watch one last time. "Ladies, your time is up. You must leave the property immediately, or I will have no choice but to arrest you for trespassing." That was the final catalyst. Susan grabbed her daughter's arm, her grip like a vice, and dragged her toward the door. "This is not over!" Susan shouted from the doorway, her voice shrill with impotent rage. "We know important people. We have expensive lawyers. We will take back everything that is ours." Her threats rang hollow, the last dying roars of a lioness who could no longer hunt. "Mrs. Hensley," I called out, my voice calm and clear, enraging them further. "Nothing here ever belonged to you. Everything you and your daughter tried to gain was through deceit and manipulation. Now, you are simply reaping what you have sown." My words followed them out the door and into the cold December air. From the window, Michael and I watched them climb into the SUV. Diana was sobbing hysterically, while her mother, her face a mask of fury, tried to console her. I knew they were already plotting their next move, but I also knew they had no legal ground left to stand on. Elias had built an airtight, impregnable case. When the SUV finally sped away, disappearing around the corner, a profound and absolute silence descended upon my house. It was not the oppressive, heavy silence I had grown used to over the past few years. This was a silence of liberation, a silence of justice served, a silence of dignity reclaimed. For the first time in a very long time, my house felt like a home again. Michael approached me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Mom, I do not know how to apologize for what I put you through. I was blind. I was an idiot. I was a terrible son. I let that woman humiliate you in your own home, and I did nothing. I let her plan to steal everything you ever worked for." His pain was genuine, a deep and cleansing remorse that I knew was the first step toward healing the chasm that had opened between us. "Son," I said, taking his hands in mine, hands that were so much larger now but still felt like the little boy's hands I used to hold. "A mother's love does not vanish because of mistakes. You were manipulated by an expert. What matters now is that you see the truth, and that you are willing to make things right. I knew the wounds were deep and would take a long time to fully heal, but for the first time in 5 years, I had hope. Elias and the officer said their goodbyes after ensuring all the legal documents were in order, and I was secure in my home. Legally, you have reclaimed everything, Elias said before he left. The properties, the bank accounts, it is all back in your name. Diana cannot claim a thing, because the marriage took place after the fraudulent transfers. It was the final, satisfying confirmation of my total victory. When Michael and I were finally alone, we sat on the couch, the same couch that held so many of our shared memories. The house felt strangely empty without Diana's toxic presence, but it also felt clean, as if a stubborn, ugly stain had finally been scrubbed away for good. In the 6 months that followed Diana's dramatic eviction, my life slowly found a new, quiet equilibrium that I had once thought impossible. The ensuing legal battle, which Diana and Susan had threatened with such bluster, ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. It was a total and unconditional victory for our side. Diana not only lost her frivolous lawsuit for a share of marital assets, but the judge ordered her to pay all of my legal fees, as well as a significant fine for attempted estate fraud. Elias had constructed a case so solid, so thoroughly documented, that her team of expensive lawyers could find no crack in its foundation. News of her humiliating legal defeat spread through our community like wildfire. People who had once admired her for her polished elegance and perceived sophistication now spoke of her in hushed, cautionary tones, her story becoming a local fable about the consequences of greed and deceit. "Truth always finds its way to the light," Nancy remarked to me one day at the local market. That woman thought she was so clever, but she severely underestimated Lillian Voss. Michael, in turn, began a slow and painful metamorphosis back into the man I remembered, the man he was before Diana's influence had poisoned his character. The divorce was finalized quickly and without complication, as she had no legal grounds upon which to make any claims. He had lost a significant amount of weight during those stressful months, but he had gained something far more valuable in its place, the hard-won clarity to recognize and resist manipulation. "Mom, I have been thinking a lot about what happened," he said one afternoon as we worked together in the garden, a space I had joyfully reclaimed from Diana's cold architectural plants. I was busy planting rose bushes, the same kind my mother had planted, not just about how she manipulated me, but why I was so vulnerable to it in the first place. His hands, once clumsy with soil, now worked the earth with a gentle, practiced care, the same care I had taught him as a boy. "Tell me what you have figured out," I said, carefully pruning a dead leaf. It felt symbolic, this act of restoring the garden's natural, vibrant essence, just as we were restoring the warmth and authenticity of our relationship. "I think a part of the problem was that I never truly valued what I had," Michael continued, his voice heavy with introspection. "I grew up seeing your sacrifices as just normal. It was just something moms did. I never stopped to truly consider everything you gave up for me. The late nights you worked to pay for my college tuition, the countless times you went without something for yourself so that I could have the best." His words were not an apology, they were something more profound. They were an acknowledgement, a true and deep understanding that had been years in the making. It was the first time he had ever articulated his recognition of the magnitude of what we had built together, not just financially, but emotionally. "Son, I did all of that because I love you, not to make you feel indebted to me," I said, my heart swelling with a bittersweet mix of pride and sorrow for the lost years. "But I am glad that you now see the value in the sacrifices we make for the people we truly love." Michael's transformation was not just emotional, it was practical. He began to contribute to the upkeep of the house, not as a temporary guest, but as a responsible adult son who finally understood his role in our small family. He took over cooking on Sundays, his attempts at my beef stew growing more successful each week. He spent a weekend fixing the leaky roof in the garage, a problem that had been nagging me for years. He installed new deadbolts on the doors, a simple act that spoke volumes about his newfound desire to protect our home, our sanctuary. "Mom, I want to talk to you about my future," he said one night after dinner. "I have made a decision. I am not going to move out on my own again. I want to stay here, with you." I want to help with everything, and I want to make sure you are never in a vulnerable position ever again." His offer was a balm to my heart, but it also sparked a flicker of concern. "Michael, I appreciate that more than you will ever know." "But you are a young man," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "You deserve to find a true and honest love, to start your own family, to live your own life. I do not want my situation to become a cage for you, to make you feel obligated to sacrifice your own happiness." He took my hands in his grip steady and sure. "Mom, staying here is not a limitation. It is a conscious choice. For years I thought independence meant moving away from you, from everything I knew. But now I understand that true independence is about having the strength to choose where you belong and who you want to be with. And I want to be here, with you, rebuilding what we almost lost." In those quiet months, snippets of news about Diana and her family would occasionally filter back to us through mutual acquaintances. I learned that Susan had been forced to sell one of her most profitable salons to cover the massive debts Diana had accrued using my properties as collateral. Their family business, once a bastion of local wealth, had taken a significant financial hit from which it would take years to recover. Diana, I heard, had moved to another city to try and start over, but her reputation, in the unforgiving age of social media, had followed her. The story of her family manipulation and attempted estate fraud, complete with documented evidence, was a difficult stain to remove. Several potential new suitors, I was told, had quickly backed away after a simple internet search into her past. "Do you feel any satisfaction, knowing that she is paying the price for what she did?" Michael asked me one day, his question honest and direct. I considered it carefully before I answered. "I do not feel satisfaction, son. I feel a sense of justice," I replied. Satisfaction implies that I took pleasure in her downfall, that I planned it out of pure revenge. But what happened was simply the natural and unavoidable consequence of her own actions. I did not destroy Diana, she destroyed herself. The truth was, perhaps, a little more complex. A small, undeniable part of my heart, the part that had been so deeply wounded, did feel a quiet sense of vindication knowing that the woman who had sought to humiliate me was now facing her own public humiliation. But I had learned that revenge is a poison you drink yourself, hoping the other person will get sick. 1 year after the drama had finally settled, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from Diana. It was handwritten on expensive stationery, a luxury she probably could no longer afford in her new diminished financial reality. The letter was long, a rambling 3-page missive filled with apologies that sounded almost genuine, but were interspersed with justifications that showed she still did not fully grasp the gravity of her actions. "Dear Lillian," it began, "I know that you probably want nothing more to do with me, but I feel that I must formally apologize for all of the harm that I caused you and your family. I have had a lot of time to reflect, and I can see now that my behavior was inexcusable." She alternated between expressing guilt and subtly blaming her privileged upbringing and her inexperience with what she termed working-class family dynamics. She still did not understand that respect and dignity are not concepts bound by social class, they are fundamental human values. "I do not expect your forgiveness," the letter concluded. "But I want you to know that I have learned from this, and I will never again treat anyone the way I treated you. I hope that you can find peace, knowing that, though it came at a great cost, your courage taught me a lesson I desperately needed to learn." I showed the letter to Michael, and his reaction was a testament to his newfound wisdom. "Parts of it sound genuine, but she is still trying to minimize what she did," he observed, his analysis sharp and mature in a way that made me proud. "It is like she wants to be given credit for finally admitting to the obvious." I chose not to respond to her letter. My silence was not an act of cruelty, but a final, necessary boundary. Diana needed to learn to live with the consequences of her actions without seeking absolution from the very people she had tried to destroy. Some life lessons can only be learned in the solitary quiet of personal reflection. Today, as I write these words in my journal, I can say with certainty that my life has found a deep and abiding happiness I never thought possible after so much pain. My house is a home once more, a sanctuary filled with mutual love and respect. My garden blooms with the roses I chose, their fragrance a sweet perfume of resilience. My kitchen smells of the home-cooked meals I love to prepare, and my living room is adorned with the photographs and memories that truly matter. Michael has started dating a new woman. A wonderful elementary school teacher named Fiona. She is everything Diana was not: warm, kind, and genuinely respectful. The difference is stark. While Diana entered my home like an invading general conquering enemy territory, Fiona arrives with a gentle humility and a sincere interest in our family's history and traditions. "Miss Lillian, could you perhaps teach me how to make that beef stew that Michael loves so much?" she asked me last Sunday. "I want to learn how to cook the recipes that matter to him, the ones that are tied to his childhood memories." Her words were music to my ears. They were the sound of a woman who understands that to love a man is to also love and respect the people and the history that shaped him. In the end, Diana, in her cruelty, did me an unwitting and profound favor. Her relentless campaign of abuse forced me to unearth a strength within myself that I never knew I possessed. It taught me to place a non-negotiable value on my own dignity, and it showed me that it is never, ever too late to stand up to those who would try to diminish you. And most importantly, it gave me back my son, not as the boy he was, but as the man he was always meant to be. Our bond forged anew in the fires of betrayal, stronger and more genuine than it had ever been before. They thought they could destroy me, but they only succeeded in helping me build walls of self-respect so high and so strong that no one will ever breach them again. And behind those walls, protected by the wisdom of hard-won battles and the quiet strength of survival, I now live a life filled with the profound peace that comes from valuing yourself as much as you value others.